Recording started.
Okay, welcome to the September 23rd edition of the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall with your ever-loving moderator, Ron. Today's topics, in sentence correction, we're going to look at three troublesome expressions, which are, the reason I call them troublesome is because they're not used the way that they are used in spoken language, and they have come up in a couple of your submitted questions. So, there you go. Including based on, due to. After we look at these, we're going to check out what are called appositive modifiers. Not a name that you really have to know, but it might help you look up more examples. And then we're going to do the rest of the session on statistics. So before we do this, before we get started, we need to give you the usual warnings. Let me go ahead and tell you what those are. Usual 5-minute warnings. All right. First, problem submissions. The usual restrictions on the problem submissions. Okay, please don't submit problems that are too general. Okay, if we get something like, you know, how do I do geometry problems? Or how do I solve problems faster? I mean, these are not questions that are specific enough to be the topic of a study hall. I mean, how do I solve problems faster could really be anything that we ever do, to be honest. And then geometry is much too general to be a single study hall topic. So those are too general. Don't submit problems that are too specific. So for instance, if you submit something like, what's the difference between C and D in this one problem? There's a place that we have for this, and that's the forums. So our forums are the place where you want to put specific questions like that. I mean, if you have one problem that you're asking about and there's no general tint to it, then just post it on the forums. And then finally, don't post questions that are too personal. So don't submit personal issues, so like scores, study plan, etc. So don't submit things like, I got these scores and I want to apply to these schools. What's my study plan? That's not what you want to do on this study hall either. Remember, this study hall is a program that is watched by several hundred people. So this is not the kind of question that we're going to answer. We're not going to answer this question for one person in front of several hundred people. So in this kind of question, we also have the forums. There's two places where you might want to submit it. One of those is the general folder, general questions. That's for things like study plans, etc. Or if it's admissions questions, we have an Ask an Admissions Consultant folder for any questions about admissions. So these kinds of things you want to post in the forums. Okay, smiley face, if everybody understands these things. Smiley face. Usual, because we still tend to get lots of problem submissions that are way, way, way too specific or too general. So so what do we want to see? I mean, here's the list of what we don't want to see. What should we see? Either two things, basically. The first thing is we want to see topics of intermediate depth. So for instance, one of today's submissions that we picked a look at today is I need help on statistics questions involving the median. Like, that's a topic of intermediate depth, meaning This is not so general that it would be ridiculous. Like if you just said word problems, that's like 20 hours worth of stuff. But statistics problems involving the median, this is a nice topic for the study hall because it's narrow enough for a study hall, but still broad enough to encompass a few different points. The other thing you might want to see, might want to submit is specific problems with a tie into a more general question. So I can't decide between C and D on this question. Could you present some material on similar sentence structures, or on this or that type of modifier? I mean, notice the difference. The difference between this and this is a pretty big difference. Like if you're just asking about one problem, we're not going to make a study hall out of that, because most of the people in attendance are honestly probably not going to care that much about one problem. And with one problem, more importantly, you run the risk of irrelevance. I mean, if the problem is too specific, then the chances that you're going to see that exact sort of thing again on the test later are very low. So that's why. But if you can tie it into a more general question, you're welcome to bring a specific question like this as long as there's some sort of more general tie into it. Okay, so this is what we want to see. This is the positive. This is what we want you to submit when you submit questions. Smiley face if this makes sense. Smiley faces? Okay. The smiley faces, by the way, are over there on the left. There they are. Okay. One more thing. When you submit problems, a lot of people are still not doing this. In fact, most people are still not doing this. Most people. Don't forget, when you submit a problem, you must cite the source of the problem. Okay, and this means you cannot cite another forum. We need the original source. We need who originally wrote the problem. And then also no OG problems. For other banned sources, there are a few other sources that are banned. For a list of those, check out the forums. On the top page of each of the folders, there should be a list at the top of what's called the general folders, quant and verbal folders. There will be a list of the banned sources that you're not allowed to use. So no OG problems, but if you give us a problem that you're not giving us the source of, we will just ignore the problem, just to make sure that we're not treading on anybody's feet when it comes to copyright issues. This includes our problems, by the way. I mean, we have something like 4,000 problems in our database, so none of us, including me or anyone else who works for this company, are going to have all 4,000 of those problems memorized. So this means that this warning includes our own problems. Even if the problem is ours, you still have to tell us that if you're going to submit it, because we won't necessarily know off the top of our heads unless we're lucky enough to have seen it. Okay, so problem submissions, there's the warnings. Please don't submit too general. Please don't submit too specific. Please don't submit personal questions. Here's what you do want to submit. Finally, you must include sources. You have to include sources. I know I say this in every edition of this study hall, but people are still not doing it. We had 6 people submit specific problems this last week, and only 1 out of 6 people gave me a source for the problem. So that source was OG. So that's basically 0 out of 6 people are following directions. Like 5 out of 6 didn't give me the source. The one who did gave me OG, which is not allowed. We cannot use OG problems here. So, any questions? Smiling face if you understand these rules, please. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Again, here's your topic list for today. We're going to start by talking about 3 troublesome expressions in sentence correction, including, based on, and due to. The way we're going to do these, we're not going to do problems with these, but I'm going to introduce you to them, and then after we do a brief introduction to the way that these are used, I'm going to give you some OG problems as references. Same thing with the appositive modifiers. I'm going to give you reference problems. So we aren't going to solve complete problems with these because the rest of the problem would just be a distraction. But we are going to do these. So first we're going to present the structure. We're going to give examples. And then I'm going to give you OG references. Okay. The question in the text box is, can you submit your own questions? If you do that, I would still want you to tell me. I would think that would be okay, but I still want you to tell me which question you are imitating when you do it. Because what happens a lot of the time, in sentence correction especially, in sentence correction when most people try to change the official questions, they wind up writing questions that are bad for other reasons. In quant, maybe less so, but still what happens a lot of the time is when students change questions, the essence of the question is lost because there's some trick that disappears, or there's some sentence structure that doesn't work anymore, or something like that. So if you change a question for your own purposes, then you're going to need to tell me which question you started with. Because it's highly likely that you're going to wind up with a question whose quality is not as good. And if you gave me a lower quality question with no source, we would have to reject it. So if you're going to imitate questions, make sure you tell me what you imitate. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Here we go. Okay, start by talking about based on. The way based on works, based on is one of those constructions that is very different in spoken language. So, extremely different in spoken language versus written language. I mean, I make the point in my classes that I teach, I make the point that spoken English and written English are very different languages. And I mean, especially in terms of expressions like this. In spoken language, you can say stuff like this. If you say, based on your behavior last night, I think you are crazy. I mean, this is how people talk when they use the phrase based on. But this is incorrect in written language. Does anybody know why, and can tell me why in the text box? Why is this incorrect? Does anybody know? Let's wait for answers to that. Who knows what's wrong with based on? Some of you are telling me how you might fix the problem. That's not the thing. In fact, Thacker A has this right. This is one of those things, ironically, that non-native speakers of English are probably more likely to get right. Because non-native speakers of English don't have this problem. Like, non-native speakers don't have this issue where spoken language has a certain convention. So in written language, yes. In written language, based on must modify a noun. It has to. It has to modify a noun. So the way this works depends on where based on is placed, but based on has to be assigned to a noun. So if you say based on x, 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 subject plus verb plus, etc., then based on has to modify this subject, whether you like it or not. This is the rule. So that covers this particular instance. This starts with based on. So the grammatical rule says that based on here, whether we like it or not, has to modify what, according to this rule? Tell me in the text box. It's going to have to modify the subject of the following. No, it's not based on, the behavior is the object of the on. That's a different thing. But when we say modifier, we're saying according to the sentence, what is based on my behavior. The way this works, based on your behavior last night, modifies I. This is nonsense. This doesn't make any sense. If you want, you can think about it that way, that whole modifier. So according to the grammatical rules, the grammatical rule says, I am based on your behavior. This is illogical. This makes no sense. So this is incorrect. Smiley face if this makes sense. Okay, good. Notice that this is very much at odds with the way English is spoken, so make sure you look for that. Another instance is if you say subject, verb, plus object based on x, 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 x. In this case, this is a modifier that points to the nearest noun. So in this case, it points to this object, whether you like it or not. So here's another sentence. If I say, I'm going to make slides based on students' submissions. This is actually correct this time, because based on students' submissions modifies slides. And that actually works, because it really is the slides that are based on student submissions. So the rule says the slides are based on students' submissions. This is correct. This makes sense. And then finally, another way that you can use this is noun is or was or are or were based on x, 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 x. This is also a correct version. So in this case, this points to that noun. These are the three generally correct usages of based on that you're going to see. That's how you use based on. Notice the key point of this presentation is do not use based on the way that people would use it in spoken language. Do not. Do not use based on in the way it's used out loud by native speakers. Okay, any questions before we look at a couple of examples? How would you change the first sentence? The first sentence could be corrected. I'll just type it in the text box. You could type it as like, from your behavior last night, I think you're crazy. That would be a correct version of that sentence. From your behavior last night, I think you're crazy, or I conclude that you're crazy. Your behavior last night causes me to think you're crazy. There are a whole lot of ways you could fix that. But remember that fixing is a very low priority. This is actually worth mentioning really quickly. You should generally not be concerned with fixing sentences. The only people who should really even be thinking at all about fixing sentences are people who are basically getting every single sentence correction problem correct. Because if you aren't, then you have no business thinking about how to fix the sentence, because that's not the job that you have to do on this test. It's kind of a useless skill, because on the test you are not really fixing things. You're just finding what's wrong with some choices versus okaying others. Basing is used like any other ing modifier. So that's not the point of today's lesson. I don't want to veer off track. But we can do ing modifiers maybe in a different lesson. So let's start looking at some examples. Indicate whether the following uses of based on are correct or not. So try that. What I'll do is I'll give you polling. There's a green check and a red X that should be visible about right here, right there. You should see a green check and a red X in your gray part to the left over there. It's next to that door icon. Okay, so everybody give me the green check if you find it. Give me the green check just to make sure. The green check, not the red X. Okay. A lot of people didn't find it yet, so I'll wait for a second. Everybody click the green check that's over here. Okay, I think most of you found it. All right, a couple of you didn't, but we'll move on here. All right, I'm going to clear those out. Number one, if you think number one is correct, give me a green check. If you think number one is incorrect, give me a red X. Everybody make up your mind pretty soon. Red X if you think it's incorrect. Green check if you think it's correct. Remember, this is the kind of decision that you have to be able to make really quickly. Like, you should not take more than about 5 or 6 seconds to make this decision, because this would be a micro, tiny little part of the problem. So here's your statistics for this problem. More of you said that it was wrong than right, and you were correct. It's wrong. So the reason why this is wrong, anybody type in the text box, what's wrong with this based on? Anybody want to type? Some of you are typing. Yeah, based on in this sentence is modifying historians, and that's not okay. So historians are not based on the accounts of ancient observers. I mean, again, we know what the sentence is trying to say, but it doesn't say that. According to the rule, based on the accounts of ancient observers modifies historians, and that doesn't make any sense. Smiley face if you get that. Give me the other smiley face icon over there in the corner. Yeah, the one you can click on upstairs. Okay, I see about 33 smileys and 1 frowny, so we're going to move on, but if you have a question, go ahead and type it in the box, and I'll try to address it as we go. if you are the person who gave me the frowny. Next example. As a child, Frank invented his own secret code based on rebus-like puzzles and on the substitution of letters for numbers. Green check if you think it's correct. Red X if you think that it's not correct. Remember, this should be a relatively quick decision. You should not have to ponder this decision for more than a few seconds. Okay, nicely done. Here's your statistics. Most of you got this correct. This is just fine. The way this works, this is like number 2, subject, verb, object based on something. So what is based on rebus-like puzzles and on this other stuff is the code. The secret code is based on rebus-like puzzles. The nearest noun. And then that works. That's logical. Remember, when you do all of this, don't forget this is not just grammar. When you evaluate modifiers, it's a mix of grammar and logic. You have a grammar rule that tells you what the thing points to, whether you like it or not. But then in conjunction with that, you also have to have the thinking. You also have to kind of use your own common sense to figure out whether that makes sense. So here, again, sentence number 1 does not have bad grammar. So the grammar of sentence 1 is fine. But then the problem is that it just doesn't make sense. The problem is that you are saying that historians themselves are based on the accounts of ancient observers. So, Marianne, I think you're misinterpreting what's up there. What we're saying up there is not just that you have to have these things. What we're saying up there is that this is incorrect unless it modifies this subject. Like, this has to modify this. This has to modify this. This has to modify this. So, yeah, I can give an example of that. The slide is getting a little bit crowded, so let's move this over to the next page. Okay. A correct example of something like this would be based on double meanings, subtle humor, and jokes that only make sense to other members of the culture. British humor is often completely not understandable to immigrants. So this is a correct sentence here. This whole thing is your modifier was based on. So based on double meaning, subtle humor, and jokes that only make sense to other members of the culture. That points to the subject. So the rule says, remember how this works. The rule says, this is what's being modified. Now you have to ask yourself, does this make sense? Yes, it does. Is British humor the thing that is based on double meanings, etc.? Yes, it is. So this sentence is logical. In this sentence, if we go back to this, are historians the thing that is based on the accounts of ancient observers? No, they are not. So that's incorrect. Again, I don't want to go too far into the issue of fixing the sentence, but no, you can't just change this to basing. Like, you would have to have an object. It would have to be like basing their studies or basing their observations on these accounts. Then you could, but not just changing base to basic. All right. Diana, parallelism, if there is parallelism, then that's a separate issue, but it doesn't really affect whether or not based on is correct. I mean, if you have an issue of parallelism, that's just an entirely separate issue. Okay. Yes, in general, if you have this kind of thing. This is generally true for other verb plus EDs. So, yeah. I'm not going to say 100% because there might be exceptions that I'm not thinking of right now, but yes, this is generally true. Okay, example number 3. The use of bright red-colored stop signs in traffic lights is based on the well-known fact that red things attract human attention more quickly than do items of other colors. If you think this is okay, give me the green check if you think it's okay. Give me the red X if you think it's not okay. Remember, we're just looking at based on. There are no issues anywhere else in this sentence. We're just looking at the based on. This should be a decision that you can make in less than 10 seconds because this is a single grammatical element. It should not take very long to evaluate. Remember, we're not looking at the whole sentence. So green check if you think based on is okay, red X if you don't. Okay, here's your statistics. Again, this looks pretty good. Yes, it's correct. This is the third type that's up there. Is based on all this other stuff. That's type 3. So this is just going to modify whatever is. So here's your based on modifier. That points to the noun, which is right here. It's the use of these things. So it's not just the stop signs and traffic lights. That wouldn't make sense. But that's a prepositional phrase. So it's the use of these things is based on this fact. Does that make logical sense? Yes, it does. Because we're saying we use these traffic lights and stop signs because red is an attention-grabbing color. So smiley face if these things make sense. Smiley face. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on. But here's some OG references. So these are problems. I'm not allowed to post OG problems on the study hall, so I'm not going to. But I'll send you to some problems where you can see based on. As you can see, this is pretty common. It's in 3 problems just in the OG 12. So it is something that you'll have some sort of probability of seeing. So these 3 problems have similar constructions in them. Go check them out. They might be right, they might be wrong, but they're in these problem numbers. So I'll put those choices in the text box so that we can move on in case anybody doesn't have them written down yet. There they are. All right, let's look at due to. Due to is another one of those things that people absolutely butcher in spoken language. So If I say due to is actually a lot like based on, this is another modifier that must modify a noun. So the rule, therefore, is the same as the rule, as the aforementioned rule for based on. So, if you say something like this, I have to stay up all night due to the presentation that I must finish. If you think that's correct, give me a green check. If you think that is incorrect, give me a red X. Green checked, red X. Again, if you're a native speaker, your ear is going to be telling you lies right now. So if you're a native speaker, don't listen to your ear. Here's your statistics. Again, the crowd is correct. This is incorrect. This is what you guys... This is not right. Who can explain why in the text box? What does the rule say, and why doesn't it make sense? Here's your modifier. Let me give you guys some hints. Presentation can't modify anything because presentation is a noun. Due to the presentation, what does the rule say? The rule says due to has to point to a what? It has to point to a noun. So that noun in this case would be night. That doesn't make any sense. So rule says due to the presentation modifies night. This is very much illogical. I mean, what you're trying to modify is this whole clause. You're trying to modify I have to stay up all night. But due to cannot modify a clause. It cannot modify a whole action. It can only modify a noun. Okay, another way of thinking about this, about due to. So there's two ways to process due to. Sorry, Seth. Okay, that makes more sense. But it's not I. It's not. It's the noun that's next to it. That's important. Like these adjective modifiers don't modify the subject. They modify the noun that's next to them. Two ways to think about due to. The first way is use the same rules as for based on. Or here's a nice little shortcut. Due to equals caused by. So that's what a couple of you have been noting in the text box. You should be able to make this substitution. If you can't make this substitution in the sentence, then it's not correct. So if you try to say, I have to stay up all night caused by the presentation, that fails. That's incorrect. So if it doesn't work with caused by, it doesn't work with due to. If it works with caused by, it works with due to. Does this make sense? Questions? Smiley face if this makes sense. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in the text box. If not, we'll hit up some examples. Okay. Indicate whether the following uses of due to are correct or incorrect, red X or green check. The observation deck at the top of the tower was closed due to construction. Correct. incorrect. Everybody give me a decision. Remember, this is something you should be able to decide pretty quickly. Again, if you're going based on this sounding good, and I just misused based on right there. If you are going on the sound of this, you are going to be in big, big trouble. That's why I'm presenting these constructions, because they don't sound like the way they're supposed to use. The crowd actually got this one wrong. This one is absolutely incorrect, even though more people thought it was right than wrong. Let's see why. Let me move these down here real quick. Okay. Let's try this both ways. Grammar analysis. I don't know of a substitution for based on off the top of my head, no. If I thought about it for a while, I could probably think of one, but off the top of my head, maybe that's tough. You in most cases you can substitute a function of for based on, but not really. Based on can mean a couple of things, so I would hold off on that. Okay, if you do a grammar analysis, here's the grammar analysis. The grammar analysis is, this thing is totally stranded. Because remember, closed due to construction has to modify a noun. There's no noun next to this. It's wrong. I mean, remember in this construction, you have to have, this is like a number 2 construction. Because this is not an initial modifier, and it's not was or is or are or were based on due to. This is sitting right. If it's anything else, it has to sit right next to a noun. So you can't say closed due to construction. This is automatically wrong. So that doesn't work. If you do a substitution, this is the observation deck was closed caused by construction. I mean, that's definitely incorrect. And remember we said this substitution is 100% reliable. And if the sentence doesn't work with caused by in the place of due to, then it's wrong. So this is wrong. Smiley face if this makes sense. Okay. Good. Let's look at another one. Here's another one. Due to the 6-mile-long traffic jam on the freeway, I was 2 hours late to the meeting. Okay, I answered a question there in the text box. Again, this should be a pretty quick decision. Red X, green check. You should be able to decide this in 5 to 10 seconds max. This should not take longer than that. Remember, you're not analyzing the whole sentence. You're just analyzing the due to. If you think this due to is correct, green check. If you think it's incorrect, give me a red X. Okay, a lot of you are still not giving me decisions here. Remember, this is the GMAT. The GMAT is a test on which you have to make decisions quickly and stick with them. So if you're sitting there deliberating on this, then that's not a good sign of the GMAT. Like, you have to be able to make a decision. Even if it's the wrong decision, you still have to be able to make a decision and stick with it. So, okay. Number one, let's do grammar analysis. Actually, first, let's get your statistics. Here's your statistics. So let's say you guys are having a harder time with due to than based on. What's interesting about this is that you actually have, you actually have more resources for due to than you do for based on. So it's interesting that you guys are getting, it's interesting that more of you guys are getting this wrong, because you can use all the same analysis that you could use for based on. Plus, you can substitute in caused by. So let's do both of these things. Grammar analysis. When you start with due to initially, who knows what's being modified? Tell me in the text box. Yep, it's I, because again, remember what we said, if you start with one of these modifiers based on due to, blah, 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 at the beginning, then it's going to point to the subject. So this says that I am due to the 6-mile-long traffic jam. That doesn't make a lot of sense, because traffic jams don't create people. So the rule says, and in this case it turns out to be ridiculous, the rule says I am due to the 6-mile-long traffic jam. So yeah, there you go. That's not correct. And if you do a substitution, you still have to do the same analysis, but maybe it'll become more clear. Substitution says caused by the 6-mile-long traffic jam. I was late. That's incorrect. Because this still has the same problem. This is still saying I was caused by the traffic jam. Interestingly, okay, like this substitution is not going to help non-native speakers, I wouldn't think. If you're a native speaker of English, this substitution is going to help you immensely, because if you're a native speaker of English, you're going to be tempted to think like I am late due to that is correct. I am late due to the construction is just as wrong as this is. It's the same problem. There's no such thing as late due to, because late is not a noun. So, yeah, that's also incorrect. Again, fixing the sentence is not the issue. I want to stay focused on, it's clear that people are still having some difficulties with this. If you look at these decisions, these are like totally split decisions. And in fact, more than half the crowd got these incorrect. More than half the crowd got these wrong. So I really don't want to go into fixing sentences when half the class is still having trouble with the basic lesson that we're talking about here. No, in fact, if you can use due to, then you cannot use because of, and vice versa. There's never an instance in which you could use both of those things. Because of modifies whole clauses. So there you go. Does everybody understand now why this one is incorrect? Smiley face if you understand the incorrectness of this one. Okay, and that's not a lot of smiley faces. Okay, that's a few more. Again, grammatically, if you start with due to, it's got to be the subject that is here. If you, let me make a quick slide on that. All right, but let's not go off the rails here, but let's do a quick slide of that. Okay, due to modifies a noun. Okay, like if I say from the helicopter, I saw a 6-mile traffic jam due to an overturned truck. This is a correct sentence. Because this time, here's due to. And so that's going to modify the noun that's sitting right here, traffic jam. And it really is the traffic jam that is due to the overturned truck. So that's correct. Because of modifies an entire clause. So, like, I was late to the meeting because of the traffic. So because of, if you said due to here, it would be wrong because the meeting is not due to the traffic. But this is the whole clause. So this is fine. That's also correct. So because these work differently like this, I mean, because of this difference, one modifies a clause while the other modifies a noun, it is impossible to write a sentence in which both due to and because of could mean the same thing. So there you go. All right. One of them is going to be right. If one of them is right, the other one's wrong. Or at the very least, if one of them means one thing, the other one's going to mean something else. Okay, so back to what we're doing here. This one, red X, green check. Red X, green check for the first one, for this due to that is right here. Not the other one yet. Red X, green check for that one. I was 2 hours late to the meeting due to the 6-mile-long traffic jam. We need to make a decision here, guys. It's already been about 20 or 25 seconds. That's way too long to evaluate one modifier. Okay, here's your stats. You guys got this one right as a group. This one is incorrect. Here's your statistics. This is incorrect because, again, the issue here is that it has to point to a noun, so this has to point to meeting. That doesn't make any sense. Like, this would mean that the meeting was due to the traffic jam. I mean, again, let me emphasize there's not a grammar error here. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the grammar of this. It's just ridiculous because it's saying that there was a meeting that was brought about by a traffic jam, which just doesn't make any sense. Like, alternatively, if you try your substitution here, you're going to see it doesn't work. I was 2 hours late to the meeting caused by the traffic jam. Again, you're saying that a traffic jam made us have a meeting, which is obviously not true. So there you go. Yeah, no, the native, like I said, native speakers are going to have a bigger issue with this. Okay, I'm going to clear out your red X's and green checks. Now tell me about this one. You think that's okay, give me the green check. If you think it's not okay, give me the red X. Again, see if you can do that in about 10 seconds or so. Okay, here's your statistics. This one is totally legitimate. If you've got if you want to do a grammatical analysis, then you've got this. This points to which in turn points to the traffic jam. So that's legit. The traffic jam was due to, which was due to. So that works. And it makes sense. Like it actually was the traffic jam noun, which was due to the brush fire. Or if you do a substitution, it should be very clear that this makes sense. If you substitute in caused by, then the traffic jam, which was caused by a brush fire burning on the side of the freeway, totally logical. Smiley faces if these examples make sense. Okay. I mean, I noticed on each of these, there are still like 10 of you that are not answering the problem. So if that is true, it's going to kill you on the exam. You have to make fast decisions. Because one thing about this exam is you have to be quick. So if you're sitting here in a study hall not making decisions, just make sure you know that if you do that on the test, you won't finish. So be aware that you have to be willing to make decisions that you are not sure about. If you can't, then you won't finish this test. So if you're trying to be a perfectionist about everything, know that will not work on test day. It just won't. So here's your OG references. There's a couple of things that you can check out. Number 6 and number 33 in the OG. So OG 12, number 6, and number 33. Okay. Now let's talk about including. Here's how including works. I'm just going to give you a correct sentence, and then I'll tell you the thing. The way including works, here's how including is used. When it's after a comma. Number 1 is it modifies the preceding noun, and it should give a list of some, but not all, of that noun. This is really important. Note what I want you to note in particular about this is if this is an exception. This looks like comma plus ing modifier, but doesn't work like one. So, like if you have a comma, any other verb, ing, this is not how they work. So I'll give you a quick review of that without going too far off topic here. If you say John scored 100 on his most recent exam, comma, bringing his average up to 94. This is a correctly used normal comma ing modifier. The way this works is it modifies the whole clause, but not including. Including doesn't work like that. So this comma bringing right here actually modifies the whole preceding action. This whole thing. So, but including does not work like that, and that's the point here. So this thing modifies whole clause. Including doesn't. Including just modifies the noun that comes before it. So in this case, comma including just tells us about body weight exercises. Does this make sense? Smiley face if this makes sense. Okay. So if you want, that's basically how it works. And then the other point I wanted to make about it was that it, so you can see OG, it's not in the underlined part, but there's an OG 12, please don't move things around the board, thank you. This is why I disabled the board properties. Okay. Yeah, guys, please don't play around with stuff on the board. There's actually really no reason to touch anything on the board, so please don't. Okay. Where were we? An OG reference, if you want to see an example of this in OG 12, it's actually in number 120. It's actually in the non-underlined part, but that's one example of it. There are several examples in GMAT prep software. I don't want to give those away because a lot of our students are going to be taking GMAT prep practice tests. But I will tell you that we have seen enough of including in GMAT prep that you should be aware of it. The other thing is that including needs to be some but not all. So for instance, if I said something like, the gym teacher asked us to do 3 body weight exercises, including sit-ups, push-ups, and chin-ups, then this is wrong, not grammatically wrong, but it's wrong because this would be all 3 of them. So you don't use including unless you're only taking a selection, like unless you're only taking a couple of them. So this is incorrect here since we are listing all 3 of them. Okay, on the other hand, if you have something like this, if you have the gym teacher asked us to do 10 body weight exercises, including sit-ups, push-ups, and chin-ups, then this is okay. Correct this time since we're only listing 3 out of 10. No, mostly has nothing to do with that because this is just saying the test consists mostly of these. But as long as there are other body weight exercises besides these 3 in the fitness test, then it's correct. So, but if you say 3 things including these 3, that's not okay. If you say 10 of them including these 3, that is okay. All right, any questions? If not, we'll move on. If they give you a sentence where you can't, the question is how do you know it's not? If they give you a question where the meaning could work, then you're okay. I mean, unless you have contradictory evidence. So if I give you this kind of sentence where you don't know how many body weight exercises there are, then you just say, okay, this sentence is correct, the grammar works, and it can be logical, so I'm going to trust it. But if I give you this sentence where there are definitely 3 exercises, then I can't say including and then list 3. That's not okay. All right. It doesn't look like we're going to make it to do any statistics today, so I think we're just going to do these appositive modifiers. Yes, it's just a part of what it's describing. Some, but not all of that now. It doesn't look like we're going to make it to do statistics today, so going back to our first slide, this is going to have to be next time. This took a lot longer. I actually thought we would get through these 3 expressions in like 15 minutes, but apparently not. It's already been over an hour. All right, so we're going to do this. We're going to delay that to the next study hall. So that's going to be October, whatever it is. I think it's October 7th. So, all right. Okay. Are we okay with including smiley face? If you are all right with including. The other examples are going to be mostly just like this one, so I don't really want to give more examples of this right now. If you want more examples, the best way to do this would be go to the forum. I'll type this in the text box. Go to the forum, search for including, find a thread on including, and then look at the examples. And then if you want to see more examples, then post and say that you do. Okay, so if you've got, let me see if I can find you a forum thread super fast. See if I can find this. I don't want to look too long, but see if I can dig one up really quick. Here you go. Okay, if you want, for the person who asked about more examples of including, here you go. This is for you. There. Okay, I just posted a thread. There's a link that you can click on there in the left window, and that'll open up another thread on the forum about including. So there you go. Okay, let's talk about appositive modifiers. Let me tell you what appositive modifiers are. Appositive modifiers are set off by commas. They consist of just a noun or a noun plus modifiers of that noun. In other words, they are not complete sentences. This is a noun plus modifiers. And the way they work is, we're going to see how they work below. But so the simplest example of an appositive that I can give you would be something like this. My cousin, comma, a consultant or an accountant works in Texas. So this is what's called an appositive modifier. Notice it's set off by commas, and in this case it's just a noun. So the way this works, in this case it modifies the cousin. But here's a little bit more detail on how these appositive modifiers work. Here's one. All 4 of the following sentences are correct. So given that these are correct, let's figure out how appositives work. I went to the bar with Mr. Smith, comma, a consultant from Fresno. This isn't a positive. Notice from Fresno is just a modifier. It's just a prepositional phrase telling us about consultant. So what does this modify? Somebody tell me in the text box. What does this modify? This modifies, again, it has to, logically, it has to modify Mr. Smith. So the consultant is just telling me Mr. Smith. All right, here's another one. The plover, by the way, if any of you don't know, the plover is this bird that, like the sentence says, It's a bird that actually feeds by eating out of crocodile's mouth, so it's definitely a thrill-seeking bird. It actually, you've probably seen pictures of it, but it picks the food out from between the teeth of the crocodile. That's how it gets food. So, and in exchange, the crocodile gets free dental care. It's kind of cool. So, here's a positive modifier, a reptile. What does that modify? Tell me in the text box. Modifies the croc. All right. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Because again, as I promised you, all 4 of these are correct. So an outing definitely does not modify Mr. Smith, because Mr. Smith is not an outing. He's a consultant from Fresno, so he's not an outing. Who can tell me what that modifies? It modifies the whole clause. It modifies all of this stuff. So, and then the same sort of thing is going on here. This is a relationship. A crocodile is definitely the crying og falling to the bar. Some typo happened there. This is a crocodile is definitely not a relationship. So this can't modify crocodile. But what it does modify is it modifies all of this noise. It's the whole deal that a plover gets its food out of the mouth of a crocodile. So no, absolute phrases are totally different, and we're not covering them today. But this is how these work. Now let's try to explain what's happening here. Does anybody know the difference between these? Like, what do a consultant and a reptile have in common that an outing and a relationship don't? It's a very vague question. Let's see if anybody knows the answer to that. Nobody? Okay, here's the difference. The difference, yeah, there you go. Heather's starting to say it. It's an item or an object. I don't know why you guys are talking about absolute phrases. Absolute phrases are different. These are not absolute phrases. It's not what we're talking about right now. Okay, so the way these work, consultant and reptile are concrete. Okay, if the appositive is concrete. By the way, everybody give me, I'm going to type in the text box, concrete versus abstract. If you understand what that difference means, give me a smiley face. Concrete versus abstract. If you don't, give me the other face. If enough people give me the other face, we'll take a second to explain it. Okay. Let me give you another slide here. All right, concrete versus abstract. I think it might just, we don't mean concrete like the stuff that sidewalks are made of. We mean, okay. Concrete is an adjective used to describe, this is a description, used to describe basically items or people or things that are like, that you can actually, you know, detect with your senses. You know, so you can, for instance, things you can touch, or that's supposed to say touch, things that you can touch, or it doesn't have to be literally tangible, because sounds are concrete too, for instance, but things that you can touch or hear or like hold in your hand, or, you know, feel it, smell it, etc. So, like, a consultant is concrete. I mean, a consultant, you can put your hands on a consultant, you can see one, you can, you know, a consultant is a very concrete thing. So, you can see them, that's a big one, you know. You can taste it. I mean, you wouldn't want to do all these things. Like, you wouldn't want to taste a consultant. But they're like concrete things. Table, chair, person, alligator, wall, car, truck. Like, if you can explain, you know, anything that a 3-year-old will understand is going to be concrete. Like, a 3-year-old, they don't understand things like relationship and phenomenon and stuff like that. But the consultant, you can hold one in your hand, you can touch, you can smell, you can feel. Okay, concrete. Same thing with a reptile. You can touch a reptile, you can feel a reptile, you can hold a reptile in your hands, all this other kind of stuff. So if an appositive is concrete, then it must modify the preceding noun. It has to. Okay, how about that? No, that's definitely not what's going on down there with those other appositives, because those are not modifying the preceding noun. Like, they're definitely not. So an outing definitely is not talking about Mr. Smith, and a relationship is definitely not talking about a crocodile. The outing is, I went to the bar with Mr. Smith. That's the outing. The relationship is the fact that the plover gets its food like this, and the crocodile gets its mouth clean. It's all of this stuff. So the difference is these are abstractions. Okay, a relationship is not something you can feel or touch or smell or see. It's an abstract thought. An outing, you can't see an outing. You can't touch one. You can't smell one. You can't hold an outing in your hands. These are all abstract ideas. Okay, smiley face, if that difference makes sense. These are abstractions. Smiley face, you get the idea behind things that are concrete, things that are abstract. I mean, I think that's mostly a language barrier. I think students here who don't necessarily speak English might not know what those are, but now you do. So if the appositive is abstract, it can modify the whole idea of the preceding clause. The whole idea, everything, all of it. Notice I said can, I did not say must. This says must. The reason why, if you think about it, if you think about concrete objects or people, they can't be sentences. Like, there's no way that a whole clause could be a reptile. That's impossible. It's impossible. Like, if something is a reptile, it's going to have to be a noun, which is why these work the way they do. A consultant has to be a person. There's no way that a whole sentence could be a consultant, right? So these must modify the preceding noun. On the other hand, abstractions can and do describe whole sentences. Like, a relationship is this entire idea. An outing is this whole thing. So, but notice it says can. It's possible for abstractions to work like other positives. So these two are also correct. So now let me change the word for to 6. Now we have 6 correct sentences. And here's your deal. The deal is, but if the preceding noun is also an abstraction, then these can also modify the preceding noun. So for instance, an outing is abstract, but so is field day. Like, you also can't hold field day in your hand, and you can't see it, and you can't smell it, and you can't, touch it. So field day is an abstraction, so is outing. So field day is the outing. Does this make sense? Smiley face if this makes sense. Okay, I see lots of smileys. Good. Okay, so this basically, in other words, if your appositive is an abstraction, then you have a choice. If your appositive is not abstract, if your appositive is something that you can touch, see, smell, hold, then you do not have a choice and it has to be the noun. So same thing here. A relationship in the last sentence talked about the whole interaction between the plover and the crocodile. But in this case, it doesn't. In this case, a relationship just describes direct proportion, because direct proportion is also an abstraction. I mean, the direct proportion is the name of a relationship. So you can't hold this in your hand, you can't smell this, you can't touch it, whatever. Neither can you with this. You can't hold a direct proportion in your hand either. So as a result, a relationship can describe a direct proportion. So let me show you here. Here's some OG references. Here you go. I'm not going to show you the problems, mostly because I can't, but okay. Number 83, this is OG 12th edition, by the way. If you need the 11th edition problem numbers, then you will have to, you can email me and I can translate these into 11th edition problem numbers for you. But, okay. There's 83, and then 118. These two are particularly interesting because these are both appositives with comma plus a phenomenon. By the way, this is 12th edition. But one of them modifies the whole clause, and one of them just modifies the preceding noun, which is also abstract. So this is a lot like relationship on the last slide. Like notice again on the last slide, comma a relationship just modified direct proportion here, because this is another abstraction. This is a relationship. But in this case, a relationship was the whole interaction between a plover and a crocodile. So these two examples have the same sort of dichotomy going on. And interestingly enough, it's the same word. In both cases, it's a phenomenon. So that's pretty cool. And then if you want an example of a concrete appositive, you can check out number 103. This is a concrete appositive. Okay, there's your OG references for appositive. All right, we're going to start winding down here, ladies and gentlemen. We've got, again, before I show the previous slide, let me put these on the text box. OG references for abstract appositive. Number 83, in which stands for the whole clause. Number 118 stands for a noun that is also abstract. And then concrete appositive, number 103. Okay, there's your references in your text box in the previous slide. All right, yes, the session is recorded. They all are. It'll be posted on the website in probably about 4 days. Normally it takes about 4 days. The tech support people post the recordings, I know. So what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to turn off the recording, and then we're going to start winding down. So.